Minutes ago, based on talking to the cops in the fire department, that building was essentially empty.
I was told that they had done an evacuation, and I had the impression it was complete because they weren't talking about a furious continuing of that. Of course, they had moved people, emergency people, out of the scene, but you still don't know. I mean, there's always a skeleton crew operating there. There was fire trucks and firefighters working from a distance to fight the fires in the rubble in the area. So while they hadn't had the full army of rescue workers that could have been there present, you didn't have that.
George Stephanopoulos. Go ahead, George.
As we said before, we're about 20 blocks away from the World Trade Center site, but we were getting some of the silt and debris up here, this far away from the World Trade Center. Secondly, Peter, there is a much more heightened activity from police cars, dump trucks, and other emergency vehicles now in the area. They're congregating about 3 blocks away and looking to go down towards the World Trade Center. We just saw 3 police cars go by and other cars that were completely covered in dust and debris.
Is Gary Breeze from the Firefighters Association still with us?
Yes, I am.
I'm sorry, Peter.
And I was just asking for Gary, do you know whether or not number 7 had been fully evacuated in the course of the last 7 or 8 hours?
No, not firsthand, but I can tell you that if it was possible to be evacuated, it would have been cleared out. You know, that's one of the first jobs that a firefighter will undertake, is getting the civilians out of the buildings. And I think it's reasonable, since they've had this much time and it wasn't terribly structurally damaged in the initial blast, that they probably got everybody out.
Okay, Gary, thank you very much. And George, we'll let you all go back to working your sources at the minute. The Mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, is going to have another news conference in a little while to now, and there's no person in the city who has a better handle at this point on everything that is happening. He was a little reluctant, understandably, to give some sense of magnitude early on in terms of casualties, but he surely knew this was coming as we did. And while we are waiting for him, take a slight right turn here for the moment and talk to our aviation expert, John Nance. It's actually not a right turn. It takes us back to the very beginning of this day. John, are you there on the phone? John Nance?
Yes, I sure am, Peter. Can you hear me? Yes, Peter, can you hear me?
I can indeed, John. And one of the things that just comes as, I think, a shock to people today is that, for the most part, we thought that U.S. airliners were, if not immune from hijacking, were far better able to handle such situations. And we get 3 major aircraft on 2 major airlines in one day. How is it possible?
Peter, I think we've all been aware in commercial aviation that no matter how we hardened up the system against the casual hijacker, in other words, the middle case, or somebody who really isn't terribly well organized, we've always known that our vulnerability level remained very high for somebody who intended to commit suicide and who was determined to do a lot of planning to know exactly what to do and how to do it to break in. And I think that's what we have seen today. This is the type of threat that has been our worst nightmare as commercial air crews and the commercial aviation business, because if we tried to harden our system against this, we'd get fewer than 20% of the normal air traffic in the air every day.
What do you mean by that? By harden the system against it, you'd only get 20% up every day?
Well, Peter, we don't know exactly how these people got on board. We don't know what happened, but El Al is a good example. They have not had an incident in a long, long time because they're extremely careful.
The Israeli airline.
Travel with them, yes, correct. If you travel with them, you are going to answer questions. You are going to be very carefully looked at. They know who they carry, and that's one reason they've been so safe. But if we tried to apply that same level of security to the entire civil air traffic system of the United States, we would cut down the amount of air traffic by, well, down to 1/5. And that's probably being conservative.
Is it your feeling, John, that at the moment, I realize you can't agree to this wholly given what's happened today, that the system is about as tight as the public will tolerate, given the extraordinary amount of air travel we do? That's an issue, right?
Well, I think we can do what we...
Both of these Twin Towers collapsed. Now, Building 7 in the World Trade Center, after being evacuated, we're told, collapsed. In the debris below, people still trapped. This is new videotape that had not been seen before. Dateline Washington, the Pentagon now says, and we've checked and double-checked this, 100 people believed killed or injured. There's no differentiation. We still don't know how many killed, how many injured at the Pentagon, but the Defense Department says its best available information is 100 people believed killed or injured at the Pentagon. And while the Pentagon symbolically was one of the 2 targets today,
the lower part of your, and it just slices that tower in half. If we can re-rack it and show it again so you'll know where to look, you'll see the plane first in the lower left side of the screen coming at it, and there it goes. And what must it have been like in those buildings and on these hijacked airliners? We heard earlier that Barbara Olson, a frequent commentator here, was on the flight that was going to Washington, or had been hijacked to Washington. She called her husband and said that the hijacking was underway. She said that from what she could tell, the hijackers, and she didn't indicate how many, except it was more than one, were armed with just knives and cardboard cutters, that they had herded all the people on board this flight to the back of the plane, including the pilot. And she asked her husband, the Solicitor General, Ted Olson, who many of you will recall argued the post-election case before the Supreme Court, said to her husband, "What do I do?" And shortly after that, that plane with Ms. Olson and many more crashed at the Pentagon. General Wesley Clark joins us from Little Rock. General Clark has been with us a number of times today. General, I wonder if you will weigh in for a second on this debate or this discussion that has been going on for most of the afternoon here, which is, have we misapplied in some ways intelligence resources, that we have become so infatuated with what we can do with machines and high tech that we have inappropriately, I guess, spent less money, less time, less effort on the down and dirty human intelligence?
Well, that's certainly a question that everyone is going to be asking, and it will be asked in official channels, and it will be asked to those who are best in a position to give that answer. My experience with it has been that I've heard this charge now for some 25 years in the intelligence business, and we have put emphasis into not only technical intelligence but human intelligence. But you know, it's very hard to get the kind of specific intelligence that would prevent something like this. Many of these people are members of a family. They come from a specific village, perhaps. Their background is known and vetted. They're carefully controlled. Their movements and communications are monitored. And it's difficult, no doubt, for any intelligence organization, no matter how well it's resourced and how courageous its members, to penetrate an organization like that and give us information. Intelligence is always characterized by a failure to know what you don't know. And I'm sure that we'll make improvements. There are always more things that could be done in the aftermath of something like this. But if there's one single message that comes through to me here, and I think will come through to many others, it's that it's not enough simply to put up the best defenses against terrorism, but that more active measures are no doubt called for, particularly in this case.
When you say more active measures, you're talking about proactive?
That's right. Preemptive measures. We've known a number of these groups have for a long time said they declared war on the United States. And we have dealt with them, we've fenced with them, we've cooperated with other governments against them, we've chased individuals, we've hauled some into court. But I think that not only do we have to ask ourselves, could we have learned more in this specific case, we have to also ask ourselves, could we have done more if we've been willing to take greater risks, if we've been willing to take more extraordinary measures earlier, to take some of these groups and these individuals at their word that they had declared war on us and they deserved to be taken seriously and they merited some preemptive action.
And just perhaps stating the obvious, sir, when you talk about preemptive action, first of all, you got to be able to find the people you're taking the action against. Do we know where the right people are, so that if we're if the country is going after these people, they get the right people.
Well, I think that's always the problem. And there will always be a certain degree of uncertainty, and there'll be a certain degree of concern about this. The best way to handle any international terrorist organization is to arrest its leaders, present the evidence, and have them tried in a court of law. And that certainly is the way anyone would prefer to deal with this. But perhaps in some cases, it's not possible to do that, or it's not possible to do that quick enough. We'll have to ask those questions in the aftermath. It's not simply about intelligence, it's also about acting on intelligence.
I mean, ultimately, sir, this is not simply a military or an intelligence question. This is a core political question. It really has to do with how we see ourselves in a country, whether we are willing to take the risks that some innocents may perish because of what we as a country do, and that's a political question for the country to deal with.
It's a profound political question, and I think it's also a question for the international community, because an event like this is a real cry for alarm and recognition in the international community. A tragedy like this can happen here, it can happen anywhere, and international terrorism is too dangerous and too ambiguous and too difficult for any single nation to handle by itself. We need strong, reliable support from friends and allies around the world, and I'm sure we'll be asking for it. And clearly one of the things that ought to come from this is not only better U.S. intelligence, it's better sharing of information, pooling of information with our partners in all corners of the globe.
General Clark, thanks again for joining us, as you have a number of other times today, and I suspect you will again before the day is out. General Wesley Clark in Little Rock, Arkansas today. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Judy?
you.
Aaron, we want to tell our viewers, first of all, that we have just been handed a report from CNN reporter Patty Davis that all international flights have now arrived or will be arriving shortly. Those are flights coming into the United States or Canada. Those are flights that presumably had left their destination hours and hours ago, but they have arrived safely, or they are expected to shortly. We'll continue to bring you updates on air travel as we get them. And I've just been told that President Bush will address the nation tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Now, we had been told a little bit earlier the President would be speaking to the American people. We now have confirmed the time is 9 o'clock Eastern, and you can count on the fact, of course, CNN will carry that address. CNN correspondent Jean Meserve has spent the last several hours at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. These are the people who, Jean, are dealing all the time with disasters. Bring us up.
$5 million. The cost of this disaster will be in the billions of dollars, although an accurate assessment will not be arrived at for quite a while. Pete and Wendy.
All right, Emerald, thank you.
Right, and just the air traffic that has been shut down, and you've heard from a lot of little businesses around the airports and in New York City, certainly, or even near the government buildings that are not having any, they don't have any customers, so they've had to shut down today. It's definitely going to have an effect on the economy, no question about it. Meanwhile, you've heard his name before today. Osama bin Laden is topping the list of suspects at this hour. There has been apparently some electronic intelligence that indicates he may be responsible. He was also the chief suspect, although he was not ever charged with bombing the 2 embassies in Africa, and also responsible for or claim responsibility for the explosion on the USS Cole. So that's intelligence community taking a good hard look at him today and trying to figure out what is going on there.
Trying to figure out are the operative words here. Let's quickly give you the hotline numbers now for the 2 airlines involved in this. The 2 planes that crashed from American Airlines. There's the number at the bottom of the screen, 800-245-0999. Those are the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. The United Airlines plane, the one that crashed outside of Pittsburgh, the other that crashed into the Pentagon. The Pittsburgh plane headed for San Francisco, and that number 1-800-932-8555. 5, they will have full information. I do not know. I do not believe they have complete passenger lists yet, or may not have released them, but that information will come down eventually. In those 4 planes collectively, it's believed that there were at least 260 passengers on those early flights this morning. That is not counting the crews. On Flight 93, we know that there were 38 passengers and 7 crew members.
Here are some of the prayer services that are going on today at USF, at St. Isidore's Calvary Presbyterian. We heard earlier from the Pope condemning the explosions today, the terrorist actions. We've also heard from Muslim leaders across the country saying that they condemn these terrorist attacks and that everyone should be thoughtful and careful at this hour to make sure that fingers are not pointed before we have some information, some solid information about how it all happened. But at any rate, on a spiritual level, people are joining together today and calling for prayers for the deceased and for their loved ones.
We have an enormous number of citizens of the state of California, people living here who are of Hispanic descent, and so we want to give you the governor's statement translated by the Lieutenant Governor Cruz Bustamante that was carried earlier across the state during a press conference from Sacramento. Again, this is Lieutenant Governor Cruz Bustamante with a statement to Latinos in California.
Anyone who has the hard work of sifting for evidence and then for the task of rebuilding. This will be a monumental undertaking. This was a nerve center of communications, of infrastructure that affects not just our nation but the entire world in terms of the access to and transfer of information. We're also deeply concerned about the attack on the Pentagon. We just had a conference call with our Senate leadership, bipartisan, Senators Daschle and Reid and Lott and Nichols. We also heard from Senator Warner. He and Senator Levin are at the Pentagon, where they have gone to do everything they can to support what needs to be done, and they were certainly very confident that our military forces are as alert and ready as they need to be. So there is an enormous amount of very good, solid work being done in New York, in Washington, throughout the country. I would just reiterate, there is absolutely no need for anyone anywhere to panic. This has been carried out in an orderly and effective manner, but we have a lot of work ahead of us, and that work includes the identifying of those who are responsible for this cowardly and evil act and holding them accountable wherever they might be, however long it would take.
Do authorities have any idea who is responsible for these attacks?
I think they do, and they're not prepared to say yet, but I have spoken to both FBI and CIA today, and they are certainly not clueless.
We step away from Senators Schumer and Clinton to give you some new information. We are expecting a number of briefings very shortly. One from the mayor of New York City. Also, in about 15 minutes from now, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, is due to brief in Washington. Shortly before 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, and possibly other members of the cabinet will also brief. They will be at the FBI building in Washington, D.C. With that, we want to let you know what is happening in New York City. The National Guard has been called out to Lower Manhattan trying to help with the rescue. It appears that hundreds of police and firefighters are missing from the ranks of those who were sent in to respond to the first crash. We go now to correspondent David Lee Miller, who is near one of the buildings that has just collapsed. David?
Linda, we're on Church Street, and this really is ground zero, only a few blocks away from what was once the World Trade Center. The attack began a little over 9 hours ago, and just a few minutes ago, we saw further proof of its devastation. We have some incredible videotape that we should be taking a look at right now. This is number 7 World Trade Center, and as you can see, this building that authorities feared throughout the day might collapse did so just a few minutes ago. It fell in the opposite direction of the World Trade Center. It fell in a southerly direction, and when it did, a huge plume of black smoke went up. Authorities anticipated that. We were warned it might happen. They gave us special masks to wear. They were wearing these special face masks, but as the plume of smoke began to grow larger and in our direction, they asked us to relocate, and authorities moved us up north about a block and a half. And now what was once building number 7 is also gone. The New York City skyline dramatically changed in just now the last few hours. Now, as for how many people may have died, we still do not have anywhere near an estimate. We do know, according to the mayor of New York, 200 people critically injured, 600 now in the hospital. Countless victims still trapped in the rubble. Authorities having a very difficult time getting to them. It is believed that it could take now up to 1 week before authorities really get an accurate measure of how many people died in this tragedy. As proof of the panic, if you go downtown here on Church Street in front of what was once the World Trade Center, you can see that women's shoes, high-heeled shoes, litter the street. People in a panic, desperate to flee, abandoned their shoes and just ran away from the devastation as quickly as they could. For a while, even the mayor of New York, Mayor Giuliani, was trapped in a nearby building for 10 minutes on 75 Barclay Street when the 2 buildings collapsed, when he was here to inspect the damage. Now, at this hour, we have seen emergency crews arrive. I saw just a parade of all types of emergency vehicles. The National Guard is here. And Linda and John, one of the National Guardsmen, made a very interesting point that up until now, I certainly did not realize today's date. He said 9/11. Back to you.
David, the video we were watching just moments ago is hundreds and hundreds of people running as fast as they could run. Does that give anybody hope that a lot more people than we now think made it out alive?
I don't think so, John. I think it's certainly very dramatic tape, and I think it shows that there was a lot of panic, but I have reason to believe that a great many firemen and policemen are trapped in that rubble. They arrived at the building to try and help people who were inside, and when the buildings collapsed, it is believed a great number of New York's finest and bravest died at the scene. I can tell you because I was here this morning a few minutes after 9 o'clock, and when the buildings began to collapse, it was a very dramatic scene here on the streets. The white cloud of smoke that spread in my direction caused myself and the police to run as fast as we could in the opposite direction. But at the end of the day, I think we're only now just getting a small glimpse of the extent of the damage. Back to you.
Correspondent David Lee Miller. David, thank you very much. This just in, it has been confirmed that President Bush will address the nation at 9 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. That's 6 p.m. Pacific. You will see it here live on the Fox News channel. We take it back to correspondent Catherine Herridge. She is at one of the triage centers in New York City where they are trying to care for the wounded who've been taken out of the World Trade Center. Catherine.
Linda, in the last few minutes, we've had a briefing from officials here at St. Vincent's, which, as you said, is the closest trauma center. They're confirming to us that they've taken 297 patients, among them approximately 45 who are in critical condition. Also among that total, 42 rescue workers. They told us, fortunately, that many of them just had minor injuries, for example, abrasions to the eye because of heavy concrete dust in the air. They also confirmed to us that they've had 3 fatalities, 3 deaths there. When we asked them what was the cause, their understanding is that it's the result of significant blunt injuries, or in some cases perhaps falling to their deaths. Now, just to give you a sense of how busy it is here right now, in the last few minutes we've had about a dozen ambulances, and as you can probably see behind me, we have some large truck here now, and there is some concern that the hospital could run out of water, so they have brought more water to the area. At this point, they're telling people in the city that if they can give blood, they should do so. They should not, and I repeat, does not come to hospitals in the southern portion of the city because they are, of course, dealing with the injured. They should go to centers in the northern part of the city. Now, earlier this afternoon, we also had a briefing from New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, as well as the Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik. They confirmed to us that already 200 members of the National Guard are in the city. They are expecting about 1,500 this evening. The city...
Nick, what can you tell us about that?
Well, Joey, it's about 2:30 in the morning here in Kabul. We can hear explosions around the perimeter of the city. We're in a position here which gives us a view over the whole city. We just heard an impact perhaps a few miles away. If I listen, you can hear the ripple of explosions around the city. Perhaps we've heard there the 6th explosion. I see gunbursts and starbursts in the air. Tracer fire is coming up out of the city. I hear aircraft flying above the city of Kabul. Perhaps we've heard half a dozen to 10 detonations on the perimeter of the city, some coming from the area close to the airport. I see on the horizon what could be a fire on the horizon, close perhaps to where the airport might be. A flash came up then from the airport. Some ground fire coming up here in Kabul. A lot of flashing, reflecting off clouds towards the horizon here. We thought that might have been a thunderstorm before. The detonations we're hearing now much louder than a thunderstorm. Also, detonations very similar to those caused by large missiles. I've been in Belgrade and I've been in Baghdad and seen cruise missiles arrive in both those cities. The detonations we're hearing in Kabul right now certainly sound like the detonations of loud missiles that are coming in. We do see tracer fire going up into the air and hear the detonations towards the perimeter of the city, heavy air detonations we can hear now. It's what sounds like a lot of anti-aircraft fire going up, multiple detonations we can hear in the air. I'll try and be quiet for a moment, see if we can pick up some of those sounds coming in from the perimeter of the city, Joey. Very quiet at this particular moment. The city still tracer fire, rockets going up around the airport, tracer fire flying across the city in the direction of the airport. The city at this stage still very well illuminated. The electricity supply is still on in the city, illuminating the city. Detonation coming in from towards the airport. Multiple detonations now going off again towards the perimeter of the city in the direction of the airport. We see one fire on the horizon at this moment. Kabul is surrounded by mountains. The detonations reverberate from those mountains, so it's difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly where the impacts are happening. Certainly, certainly it would appear that the Afghan defense systems have detected a threat in the air. They are launching what appears to be anti-aircraft defense systems at the moment. Certainly I can see that fire that was blazing on the horizon. It was a faint yellow. It's now a bright orange blazing. Several other detonations going off around the city, multiple areas. Rockets appear to be taking off from one end of the airport. I can see that's perhaps located about 8 or 9 miles away from where we stand, Joey.
We want to ask you to please keep your line up to us. We're having difficulty reaching you on another line, but please keep your line up. We can see the pictures coming to us by the video phone. Again, this is very advanced technology that CNN is using, but you will see some of the digital effect. It is not quite as clear as your average television signal, and so to our viewers, we apologize for that. But this is certainly the only video that you're going to get from Kabul, Afghanistan at this point, and you're watching it on CNN. Again, we are hearing from our correspondent, Nick Robertson, who's on the scene in Kabul with his team there, and he has reported the sounds of tracer fire. He has reported the fire burning there in Kabul, the seat of Afghanistan's power and the seat of its Taliban government. Again, we are watching their picture coming to us on the video phone, and it is very hard, of course, to see exactly what you're looking at, but you are looking at Kabul. Again, you see some tracer fire there coming across the scene. Nick Robertson, can you hear us?
We're being told, Joey, I can hear you if you can hear me. Certainly, big detonation there, missiles flying across the city. We're being told from sources in Kandahar, that's the spiritual capital of Afghanistan, 300 miles south of here, that there is no rocket activity like this south of here in Kandahar. Certainly in Kabul, very, very active at this stage. Multiple detonations. It is nighttime here. It is dark. It is difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly what we're seeing and exactly what we're hearing. Certainly the sound, what appears to be the sound of large missiles incoming and landing in the city. Certainly a big fire on the horizon of the city at the moment. And certainly anti-aircraft fire coming up from the city and rockets being launched and flying across the horizon of the city. Rockets perhaps going at the speed of several hundred miles an hour, the sort of speed that one might expect to see cruise missiles traveling across the horizon at. burning with a white glow coming from their tails rather than a yellow glow. The fire on the horizon that we can see from here burning furiously now. Perhaps it would be accurate at this stage to suspect that that was a fuel dump that's been hit by the way that it's burning, flames leaping, and that fuel dump must be perhaps 5 to 8 miles from where I am. Flames leaping up from that fuel dump now leaping up right into the air. It was a low-burning fire before, but it's now really increased in its ferocity, perhaps indicating that it is a fuel dump. Looking across the rest of the city, that fuel dump, perhaps the only big fire we can see at this time. From our vantage point here at the Kabul Intercontinental Hotel that overlooks the whole of the city of Kabul, that is in a basin surrounded by mountains, the whole city is laid out in front of us. The gunfire that was coming up from the city seems to have subsided for now. We're not hearing any more detonations at this moment. And as I say, the fire on the horizon really burning furiously at this time, flames leaping way up in the air this moment. Joey?
Nick, if you can talk to us a little bit about your circumstance. It is 6 o'clock in the evening here in Atlanta. It must be quite late at night there in Kabul.
Indeed, 2:30 in the morning here, Joey. We're eight and a half hours ahead of East Coast time in the United States. And it was about 5 hours ago that the foreign minister of Afghanistan, Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil, briefed journalists. I hear more detonations going off now. He said that the Taliban had not taken precautions against the possibility of there being an air attack against Afghanistan. He said because it was not necessary. The Taliban spiritual leader, Mullah Omar, had also made a statement saying that they felt Osama bin Laden wasn't responsible for what had happened in the United States. He said his country was a peaceful country. He wanted it to be at peace, and he wanted peace in other countries around the world. Certainly what we're seeing in Kabul these early hours of this Wednesday morning is very far from peace. Certainly multiple explosions happening in and around the city. There is a front line about 50 miles north of the city where the Taliban are fighting a battle against the Northern Alliance here. We could hear detonations coming from that northern area as well. But on the perimeter of the city, particularly in the direction of the Kabul airport, which is about 5 to 8 miles from where we are, detonations coming from there. I remember standing on this balcony about 4 years ago watching fighter jets bomb that airport as part of Afghanistan's ongoing civil war. The flash at the airport to us hearing the detonation at the hotel is about the same duration. So I am using that as an estimate to gauge that those missiles again are falling in the area of the airport. First we're seeing the flash, and then we hear the detonation some several seconds afterwards, and they appear to be coming from that airport area, in some cases several miles away from us. There is still a lot of flashing we can see in the air reflected off clouds. That could be thunder and lightning. However, there's a possibility that those reflections are missiles landing elsewhere. The flashes as they explode and reflecting off the clouds. But it's not a good indication. We certainly don't hear any detonations coming from that particular direction at this time. The anti-aircraft fire that we were seeing a little while ago is not coming up from the city. The city, apart from the detonations we were hearing a few minutes ago, appears very, very calm. The visibility here is excellent. We can see all the way across the city. It lies on a plain that's surrounded by the mountains here in Kabul. We have high mountains to the right. These mountains were used by the Mujahideen as vantage points for shelling the city several years ago during the Mujahideen infighting in Kabul. The last 5 years, the Taliban have been in control of this city, have been trying to extend their control over and across Afghanistan. And the foreign minister this evening telling journalists and CNN that he didn't believe that Afghanistan would be attacked. He said if Afghanistan was attacked, then they would call it, the Taliban would call it an act of state-sponsored terrorism. Joey.
All right, that is CNN's Nick Robertson. Again, please keep the line open to us. Nick Robertson there in Kabul, Afghanistan. For our viewers who are watching this with us on the air, again, we're getting this from video phone technology. You're seeing this exclusively on CNN. It is a very new technology, and so you could tell from the audio line it is not as clear as our typical TV feed, and the visuals obviously are not as clear, but you are looking at the city of Kabul in Afghanistan. This is a seat of the Taliban government there, not its spiritual center, but its government center in any case. You are seeing in just about the last 10 minutes, we have been hearing these reports from CNN correspondent Nick Robertson on the ground in Kabul of an explosion. You see on the right side of your screen about a third of the way over, the flames of fire. They were quite large just a short time ago, seem to have simmered down, but again, we're just not seeing very much of this because it's the video phone. Again, Nick Robertson saying that they had seen tracers going up as well. They have been listening and hearing the possibility of additional explosions elsewhere. They're trying to follow that, but it's a little bit hard to tell. Again, it is 2:30 in the morning in Kabul, and Nick Robertson continues to watch there. Now let's turn to Judy Woodruff for us in Washington. Judy.
Joey, we are in the studio in Washington, but of course riveted to these pictures coming out of Kabul, Afghanistan. With me in the studio watching former United States Defense Secretary William Cohen and Republican Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. I want to ask both of you about what's going on. Let me begin with you, Secretary Cohen. Is this something that is likely to be the United States retaliating, which is what I think immediately comes to people's minds?
I think we have to be very cautious in coming to that judgment, Judy. What we're looking at now is the United States gathering information and intelligence. Obviously, there are many plans and contingency plans that we have to deal with responding to any potential terrorist threat that might be in the offing again. But I think it's very premature to make any judgment on this. This could be part of the civil war that's been raging on for some time, and so I think we have to wait to get more information.
What do you mean part of a civil war?
Well, there's been a civil war raging in Afghanistan for some time now, and this could be simply the factions still carrying on their fighting in Kabul, rather than any kind of an attack being launched by the United States.
Are you saying, Mr. Cohen, that it's unlikely that the United States would move this quickly? I'm asking that because just a few minutes ago I was interviewing former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, and he said flat out what the United States needs to do is strike against countries like Afghanistan that are harboring terrorists and not wait to find out exactly who was responsible for today's atrocities.
Well, I think we do have to isolate and ostracize those countries like Afghanistan and others who are on the terrorist list who give safe harbor for terrorists. But I think we have to be a little more judicious rather than simply striking out. We have to get more information, and further strikes might be warranted. But at this point, I think we get all the information, then make a very ice-cold decision in terms of what we need to do to protect the American people and make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I think that may be a bit premature at this point.
Senator Hatch, again, we're stressing we have no idea who's behind these attacks in Kabul, the government center of Afghanistan. But if this were the West, if this were the United States, would it be appropriate to retaliate so quickly?
Well, we have some information. You know, about a month ago, we had information that they were planning on some big strikes, people who were affiliated or associated with bin Laden. Then just today, we've intercepted some information where some people who are associated with bin Laden basically said that they had hit 2 targets. So it looks to me like there's increasing evidence, even though it's fragmentary and even though it's not positive, that bin Laden is behind all this. And of course, I first warned the nation in 1996 on Meet the Press that we better get hold of bin Laden or he's going to kill Americans.
We're going to bring back our Nick Robertson there on the ground in, or I should say on top of a building there in Kabul. Nick, you're on. Go.
Well, certainly the fire we were watching on the horizon before, I'd made the assumption that it was an oil depot burning because we'd certainly seen flames, a dull yellow fire turn into a bright orange fire with flames leaping into the sky. I've been informed by my associates here who work with us in Kabul that it's very likely an ammunition dump that we're looking at. They believe an ammunition dump is located in that area. That, of course, would account for some of the explosions that we've been hearing here as ammunition has detonated and gone off from that location, Judy. Certainly it's all quiet here in Kabul right now. Certainly no more explosions are being heard around the city. And we certainly believe what we're looking at now is an ammunition dump, the fire at that dump now dying down, and we're hearing no more detonations coming from that dump. Certainly Kabul is within striking range of some of the long-range missiles that the Northern Alliance has and is capable of launching in this direction. And certainly in the past, the Northern Alliance has launched missiles at Kabul. It is not without the realms of possibility that the Northern Alliance could launch missiles at this time. The Northern Alliance in the last couple of days has gone through the rather traumatic process of an assassination attempt on its key leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud. Still unconfirmed whether that leader is alive or dead, and certainly there's a ferocity within the internal fighting going on in Afghanistan at this time. One certainly cannot rule out that any missiles falling on the city tonight could be coming from that Northern Alliance.
So, Nick Robertson, just to clarify, you're saying it could well be part of an internal, civil war that we see here, and not a result of something coming from the West, NATO, the United States?
From our vantage point this evening, we can certainly report a large number of explosions around the city, what appears to be an ammunition dump on fire, a lot of return fire coming up from positions in Kabul. We cannot say from this position at this time exactly where the missiles are coming from, those causing the detonations in and around the city of Kabul. It is possible it's from the Northern Alliance, and of course there is the other possibility that we've been talking about this evening.
And Nick, is this typical of the kind of fire that you've been seeing back and forth in this war that's been going on in Afghanistan? Is this at all typical?
No, one would definitely have to say it's not typical. The strikes on Kabul have been very infrequent over the last few years, very occasional. The Northern Alliance very aware that it's been blamed in the past of many civilian casualties by launching attacks on Kabul, so there have been very few direct attacks on the city. And indeed, the forces of the Northern Alliance are at such a distance back from the city, only long-range, medium-range missiles capable of going 30, 40, 50 miles are able to reach the city from their positions. And it's certainly not something that's happened in this city, a barrage of this type, a sustained artillery attack or missile attack of this type in recent years even.
All right, Nick Robertson, we want you to stay connected to us. Let's keep this connection alive. But as we're watching these pictures, let's now go back to New York and to Aaron Brown. Aaron.
Judy, thank you. I'm joined here as well by Paula Zahn, and you will hear her voice in just a moment. As we continue to look at these pictures out of Afghanistan, again, I would remind you that the technology here is it's called a video phone. It is very high-tech and a little bit imperfect, but it is perfect enough so that you can clearly see that fire burning in the distance. What Nick Robertson has described as an ammunition dump, very probably, and you can very clearly see, or we've been very able to see throughout Nick's reporting, the tracer fire coming up, the anti-aircraft fire coming up.
I think we need to make it clear at this point that no group has claimed responsibility for the multiple attacks today, and yet U.S. intelligence officials confirmed with David Ensor earlier today that they believe a group connected to Osama bin Laden may have been involved. You have talked about this all day long, and I think you've done a very good job of explaining how well-financed this would had to have been, how well orchestrated. It begs the question, if not Osama bin Laden, then who?
Then who? Nick, from the very beginning, the Taliban officials, Afghani officials have said, we had nothing to do with this, Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with this. How do you hear that? Was there any nuance in the language that sent a different message that maybe the rest of us might not have heard? Well, perhaps we have lost at least the audio portion here. Jamie McIntyre has been outside the Pentagon. Jamie, can you hear us?
I do hear you.
Are you hearing anything from the Pentagon, wherever the Pentagon might literally be right now, or at least officials, about whether there is an American involvement in what we are looking at in Afghanistan?
I have talked to several senior officials, and they've told me they are not aware of whether or not this is a U.S. military.
No one is saying yes, it is, but no one has said to you, no, it's not either, have they?
No, no one has steered us away from it. They've the officials who have been over here with the press, and we're just about a half a mile or so from the Pentagon, simply said that they had not been briefed.
And you have been watching yet another chapter of this bizarre and tragic story unfold now, perhaps the story moving to Afghanistan as well. To recap, as you know, the World Trade Center has collapsed in the wake of a terrorist attack. 2 airplanes that crashed into them, another aircraft into the Pentagon, a 4th aircraft that crashed into Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
All 4 aircrafts were headed to California, coming from the East Coast. United Flight 93 was flying from Newark to San Francisco. It crashed just 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. It's affecting, of course, people in the Bay Area. And just moments ago, San Francisco International Airport had a news conference to update the situation at SFO. Let's hear what Mike McCarran, SFO Assistant Deputy Director, had to say.
Yes, it was. For all intents and purposes, the airport is now officially closed. The roadways are closed to public access.
Determine what the appropriate response is, but I don't think we're talking here, given the nature of this assault on the United States. We're not talking about a simple, quick, even one punishing kind of response. We're talking about concerted action with our allies. We're talking about not only dealing with those who may harbor the people responsible, but any countries that cooperate in any fashion. But I think we have to think about this over the long haul, fasten our seatbelts as a country, because actions we take will have their own consequences, give our support to the President, and recognize that we're in a new phase here.
Sandy Berger, until recently head of the National Security Council. Stick with me here for a moment. Let me remind our viewers and listeners worldwide that in many of these stations, the CBS Evening News will be coming up in about 6 or 7 minutes. We'll have the CBS Evening News as part of our continuing CBS News coverage. We're going to be in the air through the night and through the early morning hours, including President Bush's address to the nation, hopefully from Washington, D.C., if not the White House itself, later in the evening. All of that coming up just to tee up the fact that the CBS Evening News will be on the air in the next 6 to 7 minutes. Right now, we continue our conversation with a man who, you can't say this, but I will, Sandy Berger. I don't know of anybody in the nation, with the possible exception of former President Clinton, because he was in office 8 years, who would know more about our intelligence capabilities, what our intelligence agencies report to us, and what the options are. I want to get back to that moment in 1998 when it was clear that our embassies had been the subject of ghastly attacks by terrorists. Now, the decision eventually was to launch cruise missile attacks against targets in Sudan, Africa, and in Afghanistan itself. NASDAQ and American Stock Exchange closed tomorrow. All Broadway shows closed. Thousands of New Yorkers have responded already to the call for blood donations. The American Red Cross is one place accepting blood donations. 1,700 National Guardsmen have been deployed to New York City to back up police, fire, and other city resources. Those are among the facts as we go to the half-hour mark. Now, at the half-hour mark, in this half hour, on many of these stations, we will come forward with the CBS Evening News. President Bush is on his way back to Washington, intends to address the American people tonight. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld will be briefing at the Pentagon. As for what's happening in Kabul, Afghanistan, unclear, but a high-ranking U.S. official has told CBS News he does not, I repeat, not believe there's been any U.S. missile attack on Kabul, Afghanistan, as has been reported by at least one other news organization. There were some explosions in Kabul, and while one reporter on scene said it was a missile attack, I repeat that one high-ranking U.S. official says he does not believe that that is the case. Now, our CBS News coverage from our worldwide resources will continue in a moment with a special edition of the CBS EV News, which will be part of our continuing coverage of the attack on America. Sandy, that was just excellent. A stunning and cowardly strike on the United States. Terrorists send mighty skyscrapers crumbling to the ground. Many innocent people are dead. The president vows the killers will pay for this attack on America. September 11th, 2001. You will remember this day as long as you live. Good evening again. This is CBS News' continuing coverage of the attack on America. A series of coordinated terror strikes today at this country, its people, our freedom. Strikes that came without warning. 4 U.S. commercial jetliners were hijacked. 2 crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City and sent the giant twin towers filled with workers crumbling to the ground. A 3rd hijacked airliner slammed into the seat of American military power, the Pentagon. The 4th hijacked airliner, target unknown, but possibly a target intended in or near Washington, went down in southwestern Pennsylvania. Here's what's happening at this hour. As the evening goes on and night begins to fall in New York and Washington, brave rescue workers are searching desperately for victims in the rubble of the World Trade Center towers and a 3rd building around the World Trade Center that also collapsed. 50,000 people generally work in the World Trade Center. A count of the dead still a long way off. Emergency operations are also continuing at the scene of the crisis at the Pentagon in Pennsylvania. There were well over 250 people on the 4 crashed planes. In contrast to the chaos on the ground, the skies are eerily quiet because the FAA has grounded all civilian aircraft at least until noon tomorrow. There is unprecedented security around the leadership of the U.S. government. President George W. Bush will address the nation from Washington, we're now told, at 9 Eastern Time this evening. And that will be roughly 2.5 hours from now, the president will address the nation. The president has put the U.S. military on high alert worldwide. President Bush vowed that the United States will find and punish whoever's behind what he described as, quote, these cowardly acts. Early speculation, underscore the word speculation, centers on Osama bin Laden. We have mobilized the full resources of CBS News to bring you clear, accurate coverage of this day that will live in infamy. CBS News correspondents and producers are deployed throughout the country and around the world. We begin here in New York City, ground zero for the attack on America. This day's horrific events began with the familiar turbine whine of jet engines over New York City, but this Boeing 767 was too low and not in the regular flight pattern. It was aimed straight for the massive twin towers of the World Trade Center. CBS's Byron Pitts is on the scene tonight. Byron?
Dan, without exaggeration, this part of Manhattan looks like a battlefield. We have seen blood. We have seen body parts. We have watched people die in front of our eyes. This was terrorism like we in America have never seen before. 8:48 a.m. Mayhem in Manhattan.
We saw a plane coming very low, and everyone said, wow, that plane is very, very low. Come on, guys, keep moving. I was walking to work, and all of a sudden, I see a jet crash into the first tower.
An American Airlines flight loaded with 92 people crashes head-on into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
And then we heard the crash. We ran to the window.
Into the building. It went into the Trade Center.
It hit the Trade Center. We saw the shrapnel fall, and then we said, get out.
And minutes later.
Oh, there's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit.
I heard a roar, and I looked around thinking that it had to be a helicopter, and I looked up, and I saw the second plane hit.
A second commercial plane, a United Airlines jet, also hijacked, carrying 65 people, plows into the South Tower.
First one we thought was an accident. When we heard there was a second one, we definitely thought it was terrorism.
On the ground, witnesses could not believe their eyes. 70 stories up with the building burning, reason gave way to desperation. New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got to that close to the building. An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
Less than an hour later, the South Tower came crumbling down.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down. I saw it blow and then ran like hell. Thank God. I'm 69, but I can still run.
But it was far from over.
Tower 2 collapsed into Tower 1. Within minutes after that, we were ordered out.
When the dust settled, signs of life started to emerge.
Chaos. It's just chaos out here. It really is. So the Twin Towers fall. It's amazing. It's crazy. I can't believe this shit is happening. I really can't. It's nightmares. Armageddon right here.
This was the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil, but not the first attack on the World Trade Center. 8 years ago, terrorists set off bombs in the basement in an effort to take down the two towers. They failed. Today, mission accomplished.
I tell you what, it's a sad day for America. It really is.
By 2 o'clock this afternoon, firefighters and police officers and paramedics by the hundreds stood by, many of them feeling helpless. There was nothing they could do at this point because the building was still unsecure.
Our main priority is to get in, do a search and rescue, look for survivors, and then clean up what's left. And we can't do that until the building is deemed safe.
Ankle deep in debris and despair, rescue workers waited. Some had relatives of their own inside. One police officer told me her sister worked here on the 40th floor, due in at 9 a.m. She was always early, she said. Always. A sign on a paramedic's van spoke volumes.
We're going to do the best that we can to get people out of there, get into the hospital, get back in line, go back out there and do it again.
New York Port Authority Police Chief William Hall choked back tears. For him, this was no longer just work. On a personal level, because I know that these are all your men and it's a business, but I'm sure that a lot of these guys are your friends. How you holding up?
It's business now, it's personal now.
Sir?
It's personal now. We have to get them.
Back live, we have had little relief here. Take a look at this. About an hour ago, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. A 42-story building, weakened by the devastation that had occurred earlier today. No word of any casualties in the building. It was the one calamity that was not a surprise. Police had evacuated the area hours ago. Fearful building number 7 would indeed fall down. This morning when the first tower collapsed, I was standing about 3 blocks away with CBS News correspondent Mika Brzezinski. As a fireball rolled toward us, Mika grabbed her shoes, I grabbed her hand, and we ran like hell. Thousands did. Dan, except for a few sirens, I have never heard New York City this quiet. Graveyard quiet. Dan?
Byron Pitts in Lower Manhattan. When the first World Trade Center building was hit, rescue workers rushed to it. We're now told that some of those rescue workers died as the second World Trade Center building was hit and eventually the 2 buildings collapsed. Now about today's other terror strike at the seat and symbol of U.S. military power, the U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon. There were 64 people aboard American Flight 77, the jetliner hijackers used to ram into the Pentagon. CBS News' David Martin reports the deadly impact there. David?
Dan, as you can see behind me, the Pentagon is still smoldering from that direct hit it suffered this morning, but it's finally cooled down enough so that rescue workers can begin the task of recovering the dead and wounded. One early count put the number of dead at 20, but no one expects it to stop there. The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Clipped this pole over here, hit another pole and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion.
and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God!"
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming in. Come on. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel.